Hello everyone, and welcome to my Beatles for Sale collection video. Now this video won't be as long as my previous three videos, and that's for the simple reason that for some reason Beatles for Sale only had a few mono issues. It was only done 3 or 4 times, and so it doesn't have lots of different variations like the other albums do. So the monos won't take anywhere near as long as normal. But I've still got quite a few copies to show, and I've got a few interesting versions as well, so it'll still be decent, hopefully. Okay, so I'll start with the first pressing mono. Now, the thing to note about the original covers, which by the way are all made by Goward and Lofthouse, you can't get Ernest J. Day for this album, is that, it might be quite hard to see on the camera, the cover photo is just, it's very sharp on the originals, so you can kind of see where the picture of the Beatles has been put onto the background of the leaves. I don't know how well you can see that, but that's always something that's easy to spot on the first covers. And of course here's the gatefold on the inside. And here's the record. So this is the first pressing mono label, and this is variation A. Now there's going to be a very subtle label difference coming up in a minute, so I'll point out the thing to note, and that is just the space in between the sold in the UK text and the XEX.503, and also obviously the PMC 1240. So it's the spacing difference here that you've got to look out for. So anyway, on the first pressing, it's got the Parlophone Company Limited on the perimeter text, recording first published and sold in the UK text. And here's side 2. So here's the variation B of the first pressing. And here is the label for the variation B. Now, as you can see, the space in between the sold in the UK text and the XEX and PMC is massively reduced. So there's pretty much no space at all there now. And that's the only real difference with this variation, to be honest. Apart from that, it's identical to the variation A. Anyway, so after the first pressing, for some reason, the monos weren't pressed throughout the 60s like the rest of them were. Nope, Beatles for Sale didn't get another mono pressing until the 1981 edition, which is the one which doesn't have sold in the UK text, but it has mono written up in the top corner. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to get that pressing for this album, so I'm going to have to bypass that for now and move on to the third pressing, which is the late 80s, early 90s pressing. And unlike the first pressings, this has a solid mono at the top, not a outline mono. Here's the back with a barcode which advertises it for the 3 different formats. And I've only got a version which has an apple on the back. I haven't got a version without the apple. And here's the 2-box label. Now for some reason this has a very dark 2-box label, probably the darkest I've ever seen. It's more of a grey text than silver text. It doesn't kind of shine like it normally does. But this is the same pressing anyway. And here is side 2. So that's it for the monos, because they were only pressed in 1964, and then again in 1981, and then again for the late 80s, early 90s, and then of course in 2014 with the mono vinyl box set, which is where I've got my remastered copy of this. Okay, so now we are moving on to the stereos. So this is the stereo first pressing. And here's the label for the first pressing. Now, it's identical to the mono in every way, with the Parlophone Company Limited and the recording first published and the sold in the UK text. And obviously this is the stereo version. And side 2 set up in exactly the same way as well. Although one thing I'd like to point out about this copy is that there is an MT tax code on side 2 in the centre there, which is, I wouldn't say rare, but just slightly less common than the KT. Now on to the stereo second pressing. Now there are two variations of this, and I've only got the variation B, but the variation B is actually the rarer of the two anyway, so that's okay. Now this variation is quite interesting actually, because it features a spelling mistake which is very hard to find. So I'll show you that now. Right, so it occurs on side 1. Here it is. Now it's on track 2, I'm a loser, or as it's spelt on here, I'm a losser, with 2 S's rather than the usual 1. So that's spelt incorrectly. And also there are a few other label changes for the second pressing, and that is the Gramophone Company Limited instead of the Parlophone Company Limited, and also it's got P1964 instead of recording first published 1964. And here is side 2. So yeah, the variation A is identical to that one, it just doesn't have the spelling error. So okay, moving on to the third pressing, which is the 1969 pressing. And here's the label. Now, as you can see, there is no sold in the UK text, and that's pretty much the only difference. But of course, that's how you can tell if it's a 1969 pressing. And there's side 2 as well. This is a very nice copy actually, so I was quite lucky to get one in such good condition. Okay, here's the fourth pressing, variation A. Now this is the one box pressing. However, I've got a couple of variations of this one box pressing, and the pressing I'm going to show now is actually a pretty rare variation of the one box. I've only seen a couple of these. I'll show you it. Here it is. Now this one box label is missing a few things. So it's missing the stereo, and it's missing the 33 1/3 over this side. So by a mistake in the factory or whatever, the label has been pressed without complete information. And side 2 is the same, that also doesn't have the 33 1/3 or the stereo on the sides. So that's quite a rare variation to get, so I was pleased to get one of those. And here is the fourth pressing, variation B. And here is the regular one box label, of course with all the information on now. So it has the 33 1/3 and it has the stereo on both sides. Actually, before I put this one away, there's something I need to point out, and that's over here with the PCS 3062. Now, after the PCS, it's quite clear that there's nothing between that and the 3062. However, on the next copy of this I'm about to show, there will be a dot in between the PCS and the 3062. And here is said variation. And if you look over there, there is a dot after the PCS. So that's just a very slight variation again. And I'm not particularly sure why that's there, but they just seem to have changed the design briefly. So that's also on side 2 as well. Alright, so now we're moving on to the fifth pressing, 1971 to 1973. And of course, after the one box label comes the two box label. And this is the first variation of the two box label. And here she is. And this has the Gramophone Company Limited at the beginning of the perimeter text. And just out of interest, they have taken the dot away from the PCS again, so not really sure what that was. And there's side 2. Now here is the sixth pressing from 1976 until 1980. And here's the label. Now it's got the EMI Records Limited perimeter text on this copy. And also I've got a few different variations of this, so I'm just going to point something out, and that is Kansas City. On every pressing, including this one so far, it's just classed as one track, Kansas City. However, on every subsequent release, it's classed as a medley with Kansas City and then Here Here Here. Now I've got two copies of the sixth pressing. I've got one where it's just the one track, and I've got one where it's a medley, and here we see the label now. So here it is. Now as you can see, Kansas City, this has been split into A and also B. Here, here, here. So it's kind of a medley there now on the label rather than just track 7. And as you can see, this is the same as the last record in every other way, with the EMI Records Limited text. However, this has just adopted the more modern track listing with that track split into 2. Now here's a third copy of the sixth pressing. Now although there aren't any label variations as such on this copy, which by the way does have the medley, there is a factory sample sticker on side 2 there. Now unfortunately I can't guarantee that this is authentic, because there have been a lot of these made brand new and then just shoved on old records, just to try and increase the value, so I can't vouch for its authenticity, although it's still nice to have. Now for the seventh pressing, which is 1980 until 1984. And here's the label for this pressing, and this has the all rights of the producer perimeter text. And the perimeter text at the top of this record reads public performance, broadcasting, copying and hiring, in that order. And here is the eighth pressing, which is very similar, as it still has the all rights of the producer, except it's now got copying, hiring, renting and public performance, so it's got a slightly different order on the perimeter text up here. And just to finish off, I've got a few foreign pressings of this album. So this is an American pressing actually, and this was pressed I believe in the 90s, possibly late 70s, and it's in mono as well. And here is the label. It's on purple capital, and this copy does sound very good. Now this next copy is from Portugal, and there's a few differences on the cover, on the inside of the gatefold that is. And that's, firstly, there's this number thing over here, and also if you look over there, there's 1877 to 1977. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but I suspect it's something to do with like the recording company or the music company. And here is the label on the yellow and black Parlophone label. As you can see, much of the writing is in Portuguese. There's side 2. There's also a spelling mistake on this as well, and that's, funnily enough, also on I'm a Loser, except this time it's spelt with 2 O's rather than 2 S's. And finally, I've got a copy from New Zealand, and as you can see there is a PCSM3062 in the top corner there, and the inside of the gatefold is completely different, as it's all white on the inside rather than black. And also this and the Portuguese copies aren't like you don't get the record out of here, it just comes out the side, which is much more convenient, I suppose. And this copy is on the one box label and is in stereo. Okay, so that's all of my copies of Beatles for sale. This video actually took quite a bit longer than I thought it would, so it's the same time as the other 3 videos after all. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you'll watch my next video, which is my collection video of my copies of Help.